And we're live. So, welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce Bob Gourley, who is a CTO and one of the most experienced CTOs we have here on the show. Bob, thank you very much for joining. Much
Oh, my
appreciated. I
pleasure.
love your background.
Oh, thanks. This is the
Uh,
workshop.
yeah, that's amazing. So, are you? Is this your hobby, or is it part of your kind of your day to day, or what?
Well, before the pandemic, I wanted to just get more organized with my tools and stuff. And I built a little workshop in my basement. And because of the pandemic, I've been here just about every day. And so it's kind of where I've been living.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it looks great. By the way, I think most people would aspire to have a an organized tool board like yourself. It's not an easy task to do. It probably took you a while.
Well, thanks for saying that. But, I had a while in this quarantine. If I find a tool somewhere in the house that belongs up here, I'll stick it up. And
I gotta get to it myself at some point in time. So why
one
don't we
tool
get?
here I'd like to mention to you that
Mhm.
may be very good for you, and that's this tool right here.
Let's see.
Observe, orient, decide, and act. It's a mental tool.
That's good. I like that. I'm
OODA.
maximizing so people can see it. That's amazing. So why don't we get started and just give us a quick overview of how how you started in your career. You're in the Navy, naval officer, right? Intelligence officer. Maybe we'll kind of start there, and how you progress to become one of the most renowned CTO and CISOs in this industry.
Well, my career did start in the Navy. I was a Navy intelligence officer for over 20 years. And the early part of my career was doing this all source analysis work where we take in as much information as we can about a dynamic situation and very quickly trying to figure out what's going to happen next and then brief people on that. That's the short version. And as my career progressed, I then led larger and larger teams of people doing that in a very joint world. The last part of my career, from like 1998 to 2002, was intelligence support to these new missions of cybersecurity for the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense had realized that they just couldn't defend themselves well enough. So they created new organizations and new structures to do that. Today, we call it Cyber Command. Back then, we called it a Joint Task Force for Computer Network Defense. And I was the first intelligence support to that organization. That was kind of my baptism by fire into the world of cyber. After
That,
that, I worked at TRW and Northrop Grumman. I
mhm,
went back into government as the chief technology officer of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a
mhm.
large intelligence agency in DoD, and left there about 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, I've been doing a lot of consulting, a lot of writing, a lot of designing more secure networks for companies, a lot of helping people test their own security. And throughout all of that, publishing blogs and writing and to continue to study.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think continuous development, personal development is key, and I find it's always a common thread around among practitioners. Specifically cybersecurity practitioners. It's something that we all tend to do. Um, so, if you look back in your career, and in pinpoint, like maybe kind of the top elements in this whole kind of a security risk posture that our enterprise and organizations, government, non-government, are trying to achieve. What are kind of the main issues? Why are we still, as you mentioned, you've been doing this for a while. Why are we still kind of lacking? There's still so many gaps that we're not aware of. And as you mentioned, you were responsible for quote unquote predicting a little bit of the future. Um, but you can't do that unless you analyze the past. So what are the kind of the key takeaways that from all your experience, all those years of experience that you can relate to?
It took me a while to realize this, but although this is an extremely technical domain created by humans, and it requires a technical knowledge if you really want to defend your enterprise, there's these non-technical components that are also critically important. You mentioned history. I believe it's very important that we study the history of these major threats that have hit us, back from studying Cliff Stoll and the Cuckoo's Egg to Moonlight Maze, which is perhaps the very first example of this large, advanced, persistent threat. And these kind of lessons from history should inform our judgment today. They don't do that enough, and I think that causes problems. But then as I got into it and studied it more, I realized that it's also important to study human history. And it's helpful for technologists to be able to communicate with non-technologists. And studying human history helps us do that, I think. I found, for example, most CEOs or other line of business people do have an interest in history, and you can find a favorite period in history that they enjoy. Talk to them about that and help them understand how that relates to the cyber conflict we're all in today. For example, talk about Hannibal crossing the Alps to invade Rome. This is important because to me it demonstrates that attacker mindset of persistence. He was told he cannot do it. He replied that I will find a way or I will make a way. And those kind of human drama stories from history can resonate with business leaders that need to better understand that we face a dynamic adversary. Just because we patched something last week does not mean the adversary's gone away and they'll never surprise us again. So to me, that was a really big lesson, although a non-technical one. We have to understand that human history shows our adversaries will never give up. If they want something, they're going to keep attacking and attacking and attacking. So we defenders can't ever give up. We need to understand this is an infinite game that will never stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting point that you brought up. It's something that never came up actually. That it seems like we're too preoccupied with the current events all the time. So we're definitely not looking in the past, past tense, and to see what happened and be able to kind of relate to that and be able to absorb some of those lessons learned and apply them to more recent event and possibly future events. So typically, what's the feedback that you get from executives when you're bringing back some of these examples? Are they receptive? Is that something that that they're kind of positive about, or is it something you have to kind of educate them and figure things out?
I've seen two kinds, and maybe it's a very narrow sample size. And I don't know if I should be worried about this or optimistic about this. I have definitely seen two kinds of executive. One just really doesn't care, and nothing you can say or do will get them to care. And these people, I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen. And it's very sad to see because you know it's going to come. Then you see the others that do care. And maybe they don't understand the technology, but they definitely understand there's business risk and they want help mitigating that risk. They may still have a lot of hard work to do before the risk is mitigated, but at least there's hope. Now, what's the size of those two audiences? It's hard for me to say, but I mean, just I hate to do victim shaming here, but if you look at the leadership of Colonial Pipeline, could you really say that they cared about cybersecurity? Really? If they had nobody on staff responsible for cybersecurity, if they didn't even have an incident response plan, did they really care about cybersecurity? I would argue they didn't, at least not enough. Oh, now they do. Now I'm sure it's top of mind. But it took 7 days of not shipping gas and aviation fuel along the East Coast for them to mitigate this problem, and millions lost in this activity. So here's the point. Some people care, and that's good. They have hope. Other people don't care. How do we reach those people that don't get it yet and help them understand that for a very low cost now, you can mitigate a lot of risk?
Yeah, absolutely, and it seems almost almost trivial that you're right. You make a relatively speaking small investment now to that's what's almost like insurance. That's what's all about, right? You're putting in a little bit of money now to potentially cover yourself when down the road something happened. But this is more of being proactive about it and making the changes. And you think that after all the headlines that you see on a day-to-day basis, these organizations will wake up and say, okay, this is something we need to take out now. And how is it possible in 2021, we still, at the end of 2021, and we still have organizations that do not have any kind of security posture in mind?
Yeah.
You know.
It's really discouraging. It really is. For decades, there have been awareness activities, and I used to think all we have to do is make the American people, globally, all Western civilization, make the people understand there's a threat, and then they'll do the right thing, like they always do. But it just didn't work out that way. I think there's a lot more people aware of the threat, but others just don't want to tune in. So how do we get to them? I really don't have the full answer. We, the security community, interact a lot together. We have our conferences and our online activities and our forums, our chats. We really are a tight community that help educate each other. How do we get outside of our community to reach into people to really spread the word? I wish I knew the full answer to that, and I don't yet.
Hmm. Is it a lack of resources? And I think that the one of the scariest pieces that the smaller, medium-sized business are the backbone of the economy, right? So it's not, yeah, you have like oil pipelines companies and so on, but
Yeah.
and they're, I believe, their weakest link because they don't have the capacity to really monitor and handle some of the security controls and posture that required. What do you recommend for enterprise of all sizes that they will do as like first couple steps to defend themselves, whether it's from ransomware attack, whether it's from any kind of exploitation of cybersecurity in terms of corporate resources?
David, I agree with you, and I would I just really like the way you put that. They're the weakest link, and I feel for these small businesses because they don't have a lot of resources to spend on defense. They want to automate and use computers, and they have to in this modern world, but it opens them up to theft and abuse and bad guys doing stuff they shouldn't. What are they to do? Well, the first thing I think all of them should do is visit the website of the Global Cyber Alliance, which has built toolkits and advice to help small businesses better defend themselves. There's a lot they can do for no cost. For example, how does a small business configure their DNS? Most of them, they'll just order internet service and follow the instructions of your ISP. And next thing you know, you're on the internet and you've got email and it works. But if you make one small change to your DNS, you can make it harder for the bad guys to communicate with malicious code by putting a DNS firewall in place. And this is a free service that the Global Cyber Alliance provides tips on how to do. Now, the big companies, they know how to do that, and they pay big providers to help manage their DNS and put in a DNS firewall. The small company or your home, you need to take some steps yourself, and the Global Cyber Alliance makes that so easy to just follow through and do. So, biggest tip, visit the Global Cyber Alliance webpage and look at their advice for protecting yourself.
I love that. And, also what came about from conversations that it's not necessarily costs a lot of money to do some of the basic stuff like turn on 2FA, turn off remote access and so on. It's not necessarily the basic tool sets are there, and it's just a matter of like a mindset to go out and do it, right? It's not necessarily like you don't have to necessarily have to spend the money, right?
Uh-huh. Right.
So yeah, so
And this includes for small and medium and big businesses. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money. A lot of it is changing configurations.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's as simple as it sounds. But now, the other thing I think you'd be a good person to ask this question is that are we currently in a cyber arm race? It seems like we are from a global perspective. I mean, you hear about nation states trying to develop artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and so on, which has two sides of it. The kind of the beneficial side and then the dark side. Um, and I kind of looking at the global picture. How are we doing as a country?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have a succinct small answer, but I worry, and I sometimes I don't like that analogy of a global arms race because the traditional arms race, we could wrap our brain around that and figure out how to put control regimes in place to kind of understand and mitigate the risk. This is something so different. It's hard to
Yeah.
wrap our brains around.
It's maybe more of a almost like a cyber Cold War.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something
There's
like that.
definitely analogies there. There really, really is. There's even the analogy of in the Cold War, there was the Iron Curtain that dropped across Russia and separated folks. And now we see, like in China, the Great Firewall of China has dropped and separates where you can use a VPN or use secure messaging and where you have to be under complete surveillance all the time. There's definitely analogies there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't lead me to be optimistic about our future if the entire world is going to segregate itself with these big firewalls against closed repressive regimes blocking the open democracies. But maybe that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I looked up one of the articles, and I pulled out a quote from there, which I thought was really insightful. Paul Karras in 1894 book Karma, a story of the Buddhist ethics. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path.
Yeah, what did you think about that? See, I was trying to underscore the point that we have to take responsibility as individuals.
I love that, and the reason being is we tend to first of all, I think it's easier to say, hey, someone else will help me in time of need, right? So I pay taxes, the government will be there for me when something happens. But I feel that there's certain basic requirements that you have to be able to help yourself and defend yourself, as well as an organization. You can't just always rely on a third party to come over to your assistant, and you have to have that baseline. And I think that we also the attack surface of all those organizations is just too large even for the government as an entity to be able to protect.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I tell you, there's so many members of the cybersecurity community are in government today or came out of government. And I have a lot of empathy for people in government who are working these hard problems of how do we help? And the bad news is the stuff that they work on takes years to put into place, and it can help. But for the executive out in industry or this small business owner we've been talking about, I wouldn't expect that help to come anytime soon. You really need to take personal responsibility and configure your stuff as smartly as you can and try to mitigate the core risks to your business.
Yeah, and you know what? And if anything, you make it a little harder to break into your organization, and it's just like the adversaries will try. Maybe if they really want to get in, they'll get in. But maybe if your door is a little stronger than your neighbors, maybe they'll go to your neighbors.
Yeah.
So you have to think about it. Sometimes you have to like outrun the slowest guy, right?
Right.
So I think in cybersecurity it's very similar. If you're defending yourself and have that capacity to defend yourself, and you're right, there's no excuse these days. The information is out there. It's not like in the early days you have to figure things on your own. There's so many websites, there's so many organizations that provide that quite a bit of assistance these days, as well as YouTube or whatever. Like there's so many resources out there that are available for you. There's really no excuse to not to take that initiative.
That's right. Another point you remind me of, David, is let's say you're a small business and maybe you have a chain of restaurants or a chain of hardware stores or a chain of gas stations. And maybe you have 50 or 150 or 200 employees. What if I told you, small business leader, that you can have a team of 5,000 security engineers on your team? You're like, wow, how can I do that? Well, use the cloud. Use Google Cloud. They have all those engineers. Use Microsoft Cloud. Maybe it's not my first choice, but they have all these engineers working security. Use Amazon. They have all these engineers working security. You still got to configure all these to be secure. But if you're a small business or mid-sized business, don't you want that team of engineers on your side? They work security all the time. It's their full-time job, keeping these things more secure. So I think that's part of the way forward for the small and mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it doesn't end there. I think that's a collective responsibility. So, security awareness training for the rest of the employees. So it's not just the responsibilities of the executives or the IT managers or IT security managers and so on. It's everyone's responsibility collectively, as well as education. I think we're not doing enough to educate, the younger generations in schools and so on. I think people are aware, but not enough. I think people are still clicking on things they should not be clicking, sharing too much information online. And you're nodding because we should find something we don't agree on, Bob. So it's like more interesting.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh, so what are you working on these days? You basically you're running the OODA LLC, right, which is a part of the OODA Loop website. What are your other projects? You're obviously a busy guy and doing a bunch of simultaneous projects. What's the kind of your go
Well,
to these days?
one thing we love doing at OODA Loop, OODALoop.com, is we invite people to a monthly brainstorming session where we talk about what we want to know about the future and how to prepare for it. And by future, I don't mean the distant 20 years out there. I mean the quick in. What's going to happen tomorrow and next month and next year? So we bring together an eclectic mix of CTOs and CIOs and CEOs and industry analysts, former government agency heads, and we talk about things like, what does the withdrawal from Afghanistan mean for the business risk, not just in the Middle East, but globally? Or what opportunities will come next because of that? What does the rise of great power competition mean to supply chain risk? And what should people do about that? What will there be? How long will this chip shortage last? And what's the impact on business? So we love talking those issues, and we do that monthly. We get everybody together and then produce a summary and use that to generate more content on our OODA Loop site. And for me, it's one of the most intellectual stimulating things I get the pleasure of doing.
It's so interesting. So do you find out of these conversations that, um, there are always like outliers from a scenario perspective? I mean, listen, no one thought that we're going to have a global pandemic like, 2 years ago. This was came out completely out of left field, right? And I think it made organization realize that even despite you can't really plan for everything, right? And you don't have infinite resources. What do you find from these discussions that come about that, how do people, allocate the resources and trying to, get themselves ready, knowing that there are unforeseen events and nobody can foresee these,
Right.
yet they're potentially out there.
Right. I think one thing that the last year has helped me focus on is the kind of future risk. And we there's two analogies that are now frequently used in the risk mitigation community. The black swan, very famous. The gray rhino, not so famous, but still important. The black swan is that thing that nobody knows what it is or when it's going to hit. And Nassim Nicholas Taleb really spelt that out in his book by the same name, The Black Swan. And he even had a section in that book about pandemics, saying that a pandemic is actually not a black swan because we all know that's coming. But so he talked about the black swan, the totally unknown thing. Then the gray rhino is a book that Michelle Wooker wrote, and she coined the term gray rhino as kind of an homage to the black swan. But in this case, she says, it's the thing you see, and it's looking at you, and it's starting to charge at you, and it's coming faster and faster, and it can devastate you. That's the gray rhino. So these are the things we know are coming, and we're not paying enough attention to take the right action. So those two kinds of risk, the black swan, you have no idea when it's going to hit and what it's going to do, but it's coming. It's something uncertain. And the gray rhino, hey, we should be paying more attention to that because we see it coming. Now, how do you prepare for the
By the
black
way,
swan?
I
Oh, go
love
ahead.
that, Bob, because people are going to remember that, and and that image that that you have in your mind of a gray rhino, dashing. So yeah, so how do you deal with a black swan, and then how do you deal with rhinos?
The super short version of dealing with the black swan is to make sure that you're not over optimized on every one of your processes, so that if there's any kind of glitch, the whole thing collapses and you're just too fragile. So do not over optimize, and have enough resources to weather the storm. Easier said than done. And there's a lot more to that strategy than I just summarized. But basically, have enough resources to weather a storm and be ready to handle uncertainty. Have a good team that's agile in decision making and can react to the black swan. Do not over optimize. The gray rhino, that's also hard to prepare for, but you can work with others who are looking at threats and tracking things like global warming and extreme weather events. We all see those coming. The next variants of COVID, we see those coming. We should plan for a continuous COVID disruption. The great power competition and its impact on supply chain, we see that coming. The weakness in China's economy is one that many are seeing coming. And this is there's some bleak projections of what's going to happen to China, and it will surprise many. But for the China watchers, they see that gray rhino coming and what it could mean for us. So on and on and on, we see these gray rhinos that we need to be preparing for, and we can build strategy and assessment plans to do that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And the sky is not falling. I like to kind of always finish up with positive tones. It seems like we came a long way, right, Bob? I mean, we're not. If you look back at 5, even 3 years ago, the industry is maturing. Everything is more defined now. We have a lot of regulatory controls in place. There's quite a few security professionals that are coming into the space on a daily basis. What are kind of the positive things you see in the industry changing, and maybe like if you had a crystal ball to see where things are going in the 12, 18 months from now?
So there's so many positive things. It's hard to boil it down to one, but we started the conversation talking about awareness. And so that's definitely a positive note. There's more and more and more and more awareness. And maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but I still believe awareness is important. It's going to get more people acting on this. And then there's so many technical controls that can be put in place. Now, we see this horrible plague of ransomware hitting us, and people have not built up their defenses enough. So I have to be cautious about that optimism, but that is the awareness will help us mitigate those threats. And that's one of the most optimistic things I can say. Another optimistic thing, though, is the future of technology is just so amazing. This world we're building, for example, the health and medical technology that's being built and the outcomes that is having on humans that believe in science, that's just tremendous health benefits, and even more are coming. And if you look at the metaverse that's being built, it's going to be a wonderful virtual reality that we're able to get into and interact for education and entertainment and commerce. So it's just such a bright point to think about the metaverse. Now, we security folks have a lot of work to do in the coming metaverse to protect that new virtual world. But overall, it's going to be a tremendous experience.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm very excited about things coming, and I think that the all these breakthroughs, we are just in the kind of the verge of the next industrial revolution, right? So we're going to start seeing, AI. Yes, it's going to come in, and there's going to be less jobs and so on, but maybe it's going to create a whole new slew of professions and jobs, and now things that we can, and we all benefit as a species. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting development that we're not aware. And frankly, if you look at even like my kids, for example, they're not aware that they don't even watch regular television, so they're not aware that you can't go back and forth. I try to have them watch a regular TV channel the other day, and they were frustrated they can't go back and start the movie again. And then when I grew up, I had to wait a whole week because we only had 2 or 3 channels. I had to wait a whole week for it to, for a movie to come up. Now they're frustrated that they can't go back and forth. They're not used to watching anything that's not on demand. So that the new generation is very very spoiled like that. So Bob, thank you very much. How do people get in touch with you if they wanted to advise, maybe be part of your community,
You know,
just get in touch and so on.
OODALoop.com is a great way to get in touch. So OODALOOP.com. The OODA Loop is what we named that after. It's a military strategy created by a former fighter pilot, John Boyd. Observe, orient, decide, and act. So just remember OODALoop.com, and you can find me there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much again for taking part, and I'm hoping that I can host you one of these days in person in New York City. Things are opening up. I'm starting to host in-person events. If the Delta variant is not going to get us all, beforehand, but I'm positive. I'm optimistic, and hopefully I'll see you in one of these events soon.
Well, thanks, David.
Thank you very much for joining. Thanks all for joining the podcast today. Looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care all and be well. Thank you.